Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's roundtable, virtual roundtable session. Today presenting, we have our cloud solutions specialists here at Bytes, Andy Watts and Bruce Knight. They'll be going to run through some content for you around sort of shifting, moving to a modern desktop. And the opportunity here really is just a good interactive session. So, you know, if you do have questions, we really do encourage them because that will make it, you know, a lot more valuable to you, rather than us just kind of presenting. So we really do encourage that. So if you do have any questions, you can pop them in the questions box on the right hand side of your screen and we can read them out as we go along. The session will be recorded and made available to you, and there will be a feedback form that will just pop up at the end. So if you could just fill that out for us, we really do appreciate it, because it will help us tailor our sessions moving forward. So before I hand you over to Bruce, I just have a couple of poll questions for you guys to answer, and that will kind of help us just understand what your sort of current state is really, and then we'll be able to help to tailor the session. So I'm just going to pop that up on the screen now. Let's have a look. So the first one is, so if you could just tell us which operating system you're currently using. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10 or other. Okay. Great, I'll just share those results with you as well, just so everybody else can see, you know, what the current situation is for everyone else on the session today. So a good chunk of you on Windows 7, so that's really interesting. That's really good. I'm glad that you're here. So let's just pop up our next poll. So if you could just tell us which Office suite you are currently using, that would be great. Anyone else left to vote? Okay, if you're still deciding, I'll just share the results. So again, as you can see, a lot of you are on Office 2010, so that is a great sign. So hopefully we can, you know, really help you today. And one more, I will just pop that up too. So obviously we're going to be covering, you know, Windows 7, end of support, Office 2010, and what your options are moving forward. But in order to kind of get the most out of this session, like I said, please do ask questions. But if you could just let us know the kind of area within this session that you are most interested in. So whether that's security and compliance or more productivity, or again, you know, deployment and management of devices, and that will help us focus on certain areas within the session. Just a couple more of you left to vote, please. Okay, I've got the results up on the screen. Okay, so a little bit of a mixture really, but perhaps a little bit more around deployment management, so I guess migrating. Okay, great. So thank you for that. That really does help us. What I'm now going to do is hand you over to Bruce, who is going to sort of run through the first part of the session.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Cassie, for the introduction. And thanks for answering those polls. Like Cassie said, it's great that the audience that we have here today is mostly on Windows 7 and Office 2010. Although I guess it's not great because in another aspect, because obviously those are becoming end of life in the next couple of months. So just to kind of reiterate the end of service schedule, Windows 7 January 2020 and Office 2010 is in October 2020. So what those dates really mean is that's kind of, they're already in extended support with Microsoft, so no more feature updates for the last nearly 5 years. But what they have been still releasing are the security updates and patches for those operating systems, Windows 7 and Office 2010 from an Office perspective, which will come to an end when they hit those end of service schedules. So certainly something to consider, and perhaps why you've joined the call today is to see how you can move off those, I guess now legacy operating systems and Office applications to what we call that modern desktop, backed by, I guess, the Microsoft 365 services as well. So one other piece to consider here is if you are on Office 365 or planning to go to Office 365 in the next couple of years, and you're still planning to sweat your perpetual versions of Office and Windows, there may be some sort of commercial changes to those services as well. So if it's no longer supported or in extended support, and you have some issues connecting to, say, Exchange Online with Outlook 2010, the support may not be able to help you resolve those issues moving forward. So although it may work, I guess you'd have some trouble trying to get support from Microsoft perspective to help you out and get those issues resolved. So those are, I guess, the three things to consider. And I guess that's why you're on the call today. So it's good to see that we have a nice mixed bag of audience, mixed between security and compliance, productivity, and deployment and management devices. So we'll cover off most of those topics today, and we'll try and put a little bit more emphasis on and around the deployment and management of those devices. So thank you very much for the input. And as Cassie says, as we're going through this presentation with myself and Andy, feel free to jump in at any stage or ask a question. We're trying to make this as interactive as possible. It's really a session for you to ask us some questions, and especially we have Andy on the call. He's really technical, so if you have some of those deeper technical questions, feel free to ask those questions, and we'll try and answer them on this call. And if we can't, we'll certainly get back to you with some of the answers. So I guess without further ado, and if there's no other questions, let's kick this off. So like I said, really, I guess the whole premise of this is to, get you off those Windows 7 and Office 2010 versions of Microsoft products and shift into this new modern workplace. Business leaders, I guess, around the world are changing and supporting kind of this new culture of work in the organization, and it really hinges around being able to collaborate in real time, having always access to files and data, and being able to be more flexible to work wherever, whenever. And obviously, of course, backing up all of that is to be able to make sure that as you're moving into these cloud services and SaaS applications, that you're able to support it from a security perspective as well. So I guess this is kind of what that utopia looks like, and if you can offer this to your employees, I'm sure they will be happy. And I guess it's kind of that first touch point when you get new users into your organization as well. If you give them an old Windows laptop with some legacy versions of Windows and an old Office 2010 environment, I guess they may feel a little bit uncomfortable. But if you can give them the latest greatest, which I know is difficult sometimes, but at least some of the newer technology to enable them to be more productive and collaborative on the go, it might change things a little bit for you. So just some things to consider, I guess, as we move forward. Really quickly, this is not really a Microsoft 365 services discussion. It's more around the desktop and that ticket to being able to enable you to get into that environment as well. But Microsoft 365, just quickly, it's sort of latest and greatest technology and it includes things like Windows 10, so the Windows 10 Enterprise version, Office 365, and of course Enterprise Mobility and Security. And I guess the three of those together, can help with that sort of shifting to the modern desktop approach. So, as you move into the cloud, leveraging things like EMS to make sure that you're secure and compliant when you do that, leveraging the Windows E3 subscriptions SKU to be able to upgrade and get into the latest version of Windows, and then stay current. So once you move into the cycle of subscription licenses and you shift to the modern desktop, it'll kind of be that evergreen approach moving forward. So you won't have to sort of plan those long engagements where you're trying to upgrade from a legacy version of Office or Windows. Those are pretty lengthy projects, and can at most times cost a lot of money to plan and then deploy the latest versions of Windows and Office. So it might take a little bit of effort initially to get into this approach, but once you're there, I guess the thought is then that you stay on this evergreen version of Windows and Office moving forward. So much easier from an IT perspective then to manage and keep up to date with the latest security updates and features moving forward. And I guess that's the idea there. So, I guess one of the things that then move into this sort of world, we often see a lot of tension, I guess, kind of having that classic traditional IT, those IT services where you used to protecting the perimeter, creating those gold standard PC images and then deploying them to users. That kind of, I'm seeing a lot of tension. I don't know about you, Andy, as well, but as users and organizations think about moving away from this completely on-prem world where they're protecting their perimeter into a more of a sort of cloud-centric world with SaaS applications, collaborating on the go all the time, where they're not always on the corporate network and they're accessing content from all over the place. Are you seeing that kind of tension as well, I guess, while you're out there talking to customers? I think it'll be really good now to maybe just get some sort of insights into what you're seeing out there in the real world, Andy, if you can maybe chime in there.
Yeah, certainly from my perspective, talking to as many customers that we have as Bytes, there's a lot of concern from internal IT departments about how do they manage these estates, how do they manage this modern desktop, the modern workplace environment. It's less of a requirement now to actually manage the user desktop, and more of a requirement around managing their identities and managing the actual data itself. Once you've nailed that, it doesn't matter what platform you're accessing the productivity solutions on, whether you're utilizing a cloud-based version of Word, so you're utilizing it through the browser, or whether you've got a full-based version sitting on that desktop machine, whether that desktop machine is then managed via traditional management forms such as SCCM, or whether it's being managed in part just by the application itself, whether that data, when you release it from the individual user and it goes somewhere out in the real world, are you still able to maintain control over that piece of data wherever it goes? So these concerns are all coming up to IT departments that haven't traditionally had to cope with that. The idea of BYOD came into fashion a number of years ago now, but because of the inability to be able to control that device and the data on it, and then the users who were utilizing that device, that went by the wayside quite quickly. It's now back in full force, but it's part of the whole management structure, allowing that simplicity of working. From an IT perspective, and from a Microsoft, what they're hoping you'll get to is three main characteristics of simplicity. So the simplicity of authentication, of administration, and of distribution. And that's not just of devices or of OSs, but that's also the application distribution out to the end customers. So there are different ways of thinking about it now, which are quite foreign to most of us old dinosaurs in IT, as I will class myself as. So we are faced with quite a stark change in the way that we will do our jobs. That doesn't mean our jobs are going away. That just means that we are enveloping a new skill set into it.
Cool. I mean, thanks, Andy. So just to kind of position the rest of the session, I guess, we had a quick poll. Obviously, the last poll that we took was just around which sort of areas we wanted to focus more on. So, of course, the modern desktop, gives you that most productive, most secure, lowest TCO sort of environment as you move into this sort of, I guess, evergreen environment. So most productive is really around, how you can leverage those sort of innovations that have been pushed into the newer versions of Office and Windows to make that experience much better for your end users. Obviously, most secure, we'll go into that in a little bit detail on how, moving into that world, what are some of the considerations you kind of need to think about when you move across. And then lowest TCO is around, I guess, that deployment and management piece. And just, obviously, when you get into that sort of evergreen version of the OS and Office applications, how that'll sort of make it a better journey for you moving forward. So I think because we had the most responses around deployment and management of devices, I'm going to just sort of start off with that piece, and maybe just Andy as well, if we can highlight some of, I guess, the tools that are out there. What is Microsoft doing to help customers, I guess, move on to Windows 10 and Office 365 Pro Plus? So I guess there's a lot of challenges, from customers as they're, thinking about this journey and moving across. They may have all the applications and wondering about compatibility from Windows 7 when they move to Windows 10. And I guess on the Office side as well, they may have some, in Excel, and I guess largely in the finance departments, they have lots of these, bespoke apps and macros and all kinds of things running in Office. Especially if they're on Office 2010 and they haven't really adopted that new sort of way of framework in the new Office 365 Pro Plus world. Some of the considerations, I guess, they need to think about, and what tools are available for them to get a better understanding of their current landscape, and what they can do then moving forward to understand what it is and what's it going to take to move on to a modern desktop with Microsoft, I guess. So, Andy, if you want to maybe just give us some insights on that side of things.
Yeah, so Microsoft have invested or are investing a fair amount of cash, should we say, and resource into aiding companies move applications onto the Windows 10 platform. That's about making sure that the applications, no matter the vendor, whether it's an internal app or whether it's a one provided by a third-party vendor, that they stay up to date as often as possible. So it's supporting services to make sure that they're available, as well as providing the resources, some of which you can see on screen now, for assessing your current infrastructure to see what's available. So the ready for Windows. So that provides you with a list of pre-prepared statements from Windows 10 based software vendors. I think there's over 3,000 vendors and product solutions available on that site at the moment, and how those versions could be utilized inside the Windows 10 stack. Also around the versioning on Windows 10, because as we know, it's Windows 10, but it has a version number attached to it. So inside the Office products as well, most common requirement that we see, as Bruce was mentioning earlier, inside finance departments and legal departments, where they have a lot of add-ins for those Office tools. So inside Excel, inside Word, even Outlook, for document management solutions or accounting solutions integration. But we're seeing that the older versions of the products that you've maybe not upgraded out there in the field because there's been no requirement to, because it just worked. Those things aren't as compatible with a subscription-based model that is always on that evergreen scenario. There's no telling where it may go wrong. So having the vendor support to be able to keep those add-ins up to date, and their firm agreement with Microsoft that they are dedicating themselves to keep up to date within a version or so, to make sure that they are still viable. The movement away from traditional COM add-ins, if anyone on the call actually remembers those, to the web-based scenarios that are a little bit easier to integrate into it. One thing to talk about on there is the analytics piece. Windows Analytics through Operations Management Suite, or OMS Suite, is providing you with a visibility on the deployment as it happens and as those applications get pushed out. It's also pulling back a lot of data around around what's happening with those app deployments, whether they're working, whether they're not, how they're working, and pulling that data back to a centralized portal, running it through the analytics services that are available inside Azure. So Microsoft's there to make this as seamless as possible. Obviously, we understand that there could be bespoke applications out there that won't necessarily function as well as you may like. But there are other methods that you may want to contemplate going down. The utilization of Microsoft's virtual desktop environment inside Azure that can cater for those legacy-based apps with extended support, as long as it's running inside the Azure environment. So those are things to consider around that. But the great thing is that with the Fast Track portal and a number of those resources through your partners, like ourselves, that we'll be able to aid you on this process, and make sure that you have the tools at your fingertips to be able to accomplish the task of migrating off those soon to be ending platforms.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So I guess there's kind of like, you have that preparation phase where you can gather all the insights and get a better understanding of your current landscape. And then once you have all that data and analytics, sort of the approach that you need to take to actually get onto those latest versions of Windows and Office 365 Pro Plus. So, and I guess that's where, once you're on those newest versions, what is that experience like for end users and I guess IT to manage moving forward? So, I think initially when they came out with these different servicing models, they weren't really aligned, but I believe, the later versions and the channels that are available today, they're kind of aligning how Windows and Office get updated. So, those are kind of in sync nowadays. Is that correct, Andy?
Yeah, it's definitely more user friendly, should we say, and even on an administrative point of view, more friendly for the admins about how they are being updated. I mean, the great thing is about utilization of things like Windows Update for Business. It's utilizing all those niceties of having that cloud-based update service available to you. So update anywhere, update any time of day or night without a resource. But you're also talking about peer-to-peer deployment. So the capability of those particular products being downloaded only once into your infrastructure. So on that Patch Tuesday, which, yes, guys, it still exists, Patch Tuesday, that everyone's machines don't run on a complete go slow over the entire period because there's new Windows updates coming out. No, they could be on a deferred schedule. They could be pulled down only that once into that one device and then peer-to-peer shared, even across subnets. So you can actually specify it so it just comes once into your WAN, for instance, and then gets deployed locally across your entire WAN. It makes things very, very, very simple with that capabilities. The deployment of other applications, modern apps as they call them, getting those sort of things pushed in quite simply, make your lives a lot easier, utilizing the update for business piece. In-place updates, because of the way that modern apps are actually designed, means that those updates are streamed down in the background while you're still utilizing the app, and the data and the settings for those apps are retained within inside that environment. just generally what Microsoft are doing are trying to make it as simple as possible to make all these services work for you.
Great, thanks. So I guess, as you start moving across to this new platform, why is it important to stay current? And I think this graph sort of depicts that really well. So I guess if you think about how Microsoft traditionally released new versions of software, like every 3 years, and then they're able to kind of keep it up to date with security patches and some features, but there was still sort of quite a big gap from between different releases. And during that time, I guess you have a lot of cyber criminals out there trying to poke holes into the OS systems during that stage. But I think as now that they've shifted to this sort of subscription way of things, and always up to date kind of options that are available today, there's less time in between those updates, and so then I guess less time for these attackers to kind of poke holes in the operating systems and find those loopholes that they need to sort of get into your organization and do bad things there. So I get this graph really does kind of show it nicely and why it's really important to stay current. So there are, I guess, those advantages when you move on to that sort of off the perpetual way of things into this more subscription type model moving forward.
Yeah, it's massively important, isn't it, Bruce, that people keep as up to date as possible inside those environments, because security is key nowadays. A threat could be produced into the global environment and hit you at any point in time, no matter where your users are. You need to have automated solutions that can prevent that and provide patching and updates to that global environment. So the utilization of ATA, Azure Threat Analytics, the Azure Threat Protection, Windows Defender, Azure Threat Protection, and the Office 365 Azure Threat Protection as well, all combining into one to provide you that complete solution, so that those updates are deployed when they're needed to and at the speed that they're needed to do. Sorry, Bruce.
Thanks. And I mean, and what other, once I guess they get there, what other sort of tools and experiences would they have available to them, moving forward? So I guess, like we briefly touched on earlier on, in the traditional classic style of IT, where you create those goal images and you deploy them maybe via System Center, for example. As we move into this new world with the modern desktop, what sort of other tools potentially could they leverage then to make life a lot easier for them? I guess, as they move out and deploy new hardware on new PCs and laptops.
Yeah, to follow on with what Microsoft's general movement is now, is to make sure it's you're looking at things like what they call autopilot, which is on screen now, and what that's providing you with is that out of the box experience for your users, to the point where a specific user could be sent a machine just straight away from the manufacturers, and have the ability to open it up, log in with their work-based credentials, and have that machine configure itself on site, ready to roll. So the end user then has a completely seamless experience of deployment of device, rather than having to have a machine that you bring in. You have to wipe off the operating system that's currently on there. You have to create a gold image build, deploy that onto the machine, and then have the user sit down with you and go through the setup of the individual applications on it, just the minor configurations that are user-based. Well, with the advent of things like autopilot, and very soon a new piece of work coming along with that, will be in the blog soon, will be a case of you can wrap your entire installation up into an autopilot profile. An end user will fire up that machine, it will configure it, stripping out bloatware if that exists inside the machine, activating the device management capabilities, configuring the network settings, configuring anything that needs to be done that traditionally you may have done through group policy, for instance, can be done utilizing autopilot in conjunction with conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication, and Intune for its device management capabilities. Now that can also go right the way down to encrypting the device completely if you want to. So utilization of BitLocker to encrypt that device and being managed centrally, making it very, very simple to manage that product in a centralized way.
Great. So I guess it's all about, as you shift to modern desktop, and it's the change in how you manage Windows components as well. So I guess what you're trying to say there really is then, we don't have to have System Center on-prem anymore. We can just use Intune in Windows 10. Is that right? Well, I guess there's going to take some time until they get parity, but I guess that's where they're kind of moving.
I mean, when you start to look at the capabilities, if we look at the best practices for modern desktop, it's going to include a number of these products. So it will include autopilot. It will be Azure AD join only. So that's your device connecting directly to Azure AD. Intune being the management portal, Windows Update for Business, as we mentioned earlier, being that deployment methodology for self-service utilization of those devices. You've got delivery optimization, so from a peer-to-peer and subnet-based delivery. Authentication perspective, utilizing Windows Hello for Business. That's the biometrics elements coming into that multi-factor. So that's on iris as well as facial recognition, as well as fingerprint biometrics, as well as anything else that comes out that can go into that Hello field. And with the security aspects of the Defender suite coming into play as well. That's not just the individual elements of ATP, but that's the combination of ATP with other security elements, all balancing straight back into one. So that'll be things like device guard, credential guard for the storage of the identities, to make sure that those identities are held on the TPM chip rather than being held on the RAM or in the hard drive anymore. BitLocker, information protection, Defender for those antiviral threats or malware threats. So the whole bunch of capabilities that are all blended into one to give you that very, very simple solution going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So, and I guess that's a good way to kind of lead us in then to the more of the security topics around what to think about as you shift to the modern desktop. And we'll jump into those slides in a second. But I think before we move on, do we have any questions sort of around what we've just covered? Maybe some of the tools that are available to you. Is there anything you want to know, or based on, I guess, what we've just had a discussion on? Any questions for now?
I think that's a no.
Yep, doesn't look like. Okay. I guess then we can carry on. We'll move into those kind of tie between security and compliance and productivity. But I guess a hot topic is security these days, and kind of what you need to consider and what's available to you as you move into this modern desktop world with Microsoft out the box, as well as what you can kind of hook into from a Microsoft 365 perspective as well. So I guess we'll and you touched briefly on some of these pieces as well.
Sorry,
Andy, but I think what would be nice is I think we'll go through obviously some of the threat protection capabilities built into Windows and Office, and then obviously we briefly chatted around identity and access management, but I think we'll maybe dive just a little bit deeper into some of those components. So I guess the first kind of piece being what's happening from a advanced threat protection in Office, and I guess as Windows and in the Azure world as well. The 3 different versions of or flavors of threat protection and how those kind of work together, I guess, to have that pre-breach protection. So making sure that you're protecting the front door and nobody, you're not letting those bad guys in. And then I guess the other side of the coin where you want to make sure you're only letting the good guys in, and they're getting access to the content that's meant for them, and that they're not able to, I guess, leak content that they shouldn't be outside the organization, whether it's a malicious intent or not, and what sort of information protection kind of capabilities reside within that as well. So perhaps if we can start off with going into a little bit more detail around the threat protection piece, and then we can talk more about information protection and what's going on in that space.
Yeah, if you'd like, Bruce, I've got a slide here you can have a look at. So if I can just share my screen quickly.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. Thanks, Andy.
Waiting for the little button to come up my side.
Have you got it there?
No, it worked so well in practice, didn't it?
Let's just try that again quickly. Not coming through, Andy?
No, oh well.
Okay. Yep. Sorry about that, folks. But I think let's carry on with these slides. Then I think it still positions quite nicely how threat protection across the modern workplace would kind of help our customers out there, and maybe you can briefly touch on some of those points.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Microsoft has a combined stack that comes across the entire board. It's a shame I can't show you this one, but that entirety of stack means that you are covered from the whole Office 365 through the Windows ATP and into the Azure Threat Analytics section. How Microsoft are intending to maximize the detection coverage through each of the attack phases that could happen inside your environment, from a user receiving a phishing email, clicking on a URL, which we know they shouldn't do, the exploit happening within inside that. So all of these elements are being picked up by the Office 365 piece at the moment. Or a user browses to a website which is out of it or runs an application, there's an exploit picked up by a Windows ATP, either an installation or a persistency channel or privileged escalation. If it starts to go out into the wider world, into the Azure environments, into your other standard environments, it will be watching out for reconnaissance type strings that are running around looking for things. It'll be looking for lateral movement capabilities within inside user profiles. Are they trying to jump over to other areas where maybe they've never utilized before? Are they trying to access, or is something else that's abnormal trying to access shared resources within inside that environment? So it will track right the way through the entire stack to make sure that you've got complete coverage of everything it is trying to do, or any service running on your devices are actually trying to do at any point in time. That's mainly what is happening within inside the Microsoft machine intelligence environment. So things like taking those URLs that come through a document or an email and effectively exploding them to make sure that they're actually correctly working. Are they going to the right place? Is that a URL that it's actually going to a good place for it to go to? How does it score? Most of these things nowadays are done on a scoring basis. So how does it score? Does it score well? Does it not? Making sure that environment for your users is simplistic, so they don't have to worry about too much overhead in what's actually happening in their environment, but but they can just carry on and do their work without too much of an issue. So an email comes in, they can sit with Virtually Fearless to be able to click on that link. Why? Because you're covering it with ATP in the background. So even if it is a bit dodgy, it will actually prompt it that it's being scanned and say, okay, well, we're making sure that this actually does exist and does go back to the right areas where it should do. So it can't come up with your banking page and ask you for the details, or even it can't come up with an Office 365 login page that looks identical and yet takes your details and makes use of them in another environment, which is never what we need.
Yeah, and I guess you know what's great with that as well, because those URLs are wrapped. It doesn't matter where you're accessing your email, for example, with those URLs in them, it will still go through that engine to scan it and make sure it's a safe link before you can go through to that website. So if you're on your mobile device, you click on the link, it's still going to get scanned without any agents, I guess, being required on any of your devices.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you're trying to access it from, wherever you're trying to access it from. It's embedded in the back end systems in Office 365.
Yeah, and it's also across the services, right? Not just in email. If I have a Word document with a URL, it's going to check those as well.
Yeah, absolutely everywhere.
Great. I think then let's move on to, I guess, the next capability that we talked about, and that's safeguarding company data. So this is, I guess, a little bit around what we're doing from an encryption perspective, a little bit around multi-factor authentication, which I think you touched on a little bit earlier, and I guess this is the piece around information protection. And I think a lot has happened, certainly over the last couple of months, to unify that labeling environment within things like Windows, Office, and enterprise mobility and security. It was a little bit disjointed, I guess, in the beginning, where we had, if you moved to Windows 10, you had Windows information protection, and there were labels in there for private and business. And then in Office 365 world, you may have been able to create some, sensitivity labels in there, and those could be, different ones. And then, if you then got EMS and you use the Azure Information Protection, you could create different labels in there and then apply different policies. So they weren't kind of talking to each other, but I believe now that's kind of all changing with Microsoft Information Protection moving forward, which is, I think, a great thing.
Yes, with the information protection, Microsoft have formed basically a single portal, a single worldview on information protection, pulling into it the data that's stored utilizing Azure Information Protection in the on-premise world, or what they're calling on-premise world. What that basically means is if it's sitting in an on-premise installation of SharePoint, for instance, or if it's an Assist or Samba or any form of file share that's available as straight flat files, as long as the content can be read and it's not already encrypted by something else, then it can be classified and protected utilizing AIP. Now, in conjunction with that, as Bruce was nicely saying, that Microsoft have also now integrated the Office 365 version of the AIP suite. So yes, there was an issue where you could classify and protect something twice with inside an on-premise environment, putting it into Office 365 and getting it classified with inside there as well, and then further classified through transport routes. So there was a number of things. Now all that has come together, giving you a single point of view of what's being classified, how it's being protected, and where that data currently is. Because it will even pop its head up and say, okay, I'm over here. So that document is trying to be accessed from Chicago, whereas it never should have left the UK. It's being accessed in the Eastern Bloc countries. Anywhere it's actually being, it will poke its head up and say, hi, I'm over here. I'm trying to authenticate. Are you going to let me in? And then it can be restricted at that point, either automatically or alternatively, it could be manually restricted back on the reporting.
Yeah, and I guess, I like to use probably a pretty common example. I don't know if anyone out there has tried to, you send an email, potentially you put in a distribution list, or you send it to the wrong person, and as you hit the send button, you kind of realize, oh dear, you sent it to the wrong Andy, or you sent it to, you've included a whole host of people that shouldn't actually be getting that document.
Replied to all.
And then you try and hit the recall button. It's like, but by the time you hit recall, it's too late, and that information's kind of out there. Where I guess if you're leveraging things like information protection, you can ensure that document's only being able to be accessed by the people that are intended to get access, and then also have that control to revoke access as well. So, if you decide, oh, actually, these people shouldn't have access to this content anymore, if you want to time bomb it and after a specific date, make sure that access is revoked for whatever reason, you can do that as well.
Yeah, it's very important to be able to have that level of control even after delivery of a piece of data out to an end user. Just even if it's just to change the access permissions to it, to say, okay, I previously sent this out as fully editable. I don't actually want that. I want it to be a confidential document that they can only print, and that's it. The ability to sort of retrospectively add those capabilities into the environment are well worth looking at. And things like, on the information protection piece, it's pulling that data back into that centralized portal. So you've got visibility on what's happening. So you can actually do analysis on where these things are being utilized correctly, and if there are any problems or obvious risks inside your environment that need to be addressed as a matter of concern. Those things are worth keeping in play, as well as the fact that, on this slide now, so you've got information protection, yes, around the data itself, but you could also protect the device with BitLocker to make sure that the device is encrypted, so that if a device is left somewhere on a train or in a plane or any other automobile, but if it is left somewhere and picked up by someone else, they have no access to that data storage, and that can be remotely managed, centrally managed, utilizing Intune. You can still use the BitLocker administration and monitoring toolkit, MBAM, but it's utilization of Intune. Now that comes, the centralized management piece comes from, excuse me, Windows 10 Enterprise, and not from Windows 10 Pro. Windows 10 Pro is still a manual process. But if you do decide to utilize the centralized management tool sets, they actually all come with Windows 10 Enterprise.
Great. So there, I guess you're having that sort of multi-pronged approach then when you look at information protection. So making sure everything's encrypted at rest on your hard drives. So like you say, if you leave something behind, gets lost or stolen, you're covered from that perspective. And then also as that data or content leaves, to make sure that it's encrypted, as it moves across into potentially other SaaS applications, and to be able to then have control over what happens to that data when it is out there. So it's some really good capabilities. I think the last piece I wanted to just quickly touch on, and you also alluded to this a bit earlier, is around identity and access management. So really, I think this is, I guess the utopia here is to get away from passwords altogether. Have that passwordless environment, and I think everybody will be much happier when we do get to that state. But we're not quite there at the moment, although it is kind of creeping in some areas. I know that's obviously, when I use, for example, my personal email account with Hotmail or Outlook.com, that I can just log in with an app. So I get a prompt on my phone. I approve that, and it'll show me a number on the screen, so it does know that I actually am in front of that device, and then I can log into the services. So I won't have to remember all those complex passwords, or potentially maybe not complex enough passwords.
And that has
maybe want to go a little bit deeper into this for us.
Yeah, that has changed from a governmental and compliance perspective anyway. If any of you are looking at Cyber Essentials, what you'll see in their requirements now is it's changed down to Don't change your passwords. Don't have a password change policy. Keep it to a complex passphrase, and utilization of multi-factor authentication now for other ways to get into it. So yeah, it could be phone-based, could be a PIN, biometrics, facial recognition of some sort. There's a number of different capabilities that are built into those solutions that can make it much more seamless for you. I find it hard if anyone has not actually utilized some form of multi-factor in their normal out of work life nowadays. Most people are using it for online banking. They'll have that pings your phone, or they'll need a little card reader to type their details in to change the more sensitive elements of their payment schedules. Those sort of things are in our day-to-day lives now. So why aren't they in our workplace? But to make that simpler, we may not want to have the hassle when we're sitting in the office with our laptops, that are work-provided laptops. We may not want to have to go through that multi-factor authentication all the time. Well, that can be taken into a conditional access policy. So yes, you're on a device that work has provided and is currently managing, and it's compliant and up to date on everything. Tick in the box. You're utilizing your correct user credentials. Another tick in the box. And you're accessing it from inside the subnets that are related to our company. Another tick in the box. A very simple process then, which means that, hey, I just have to log in with my credentials and I don't have to worry about anything else. Or I could just sit in front of the screen and click the button, and it recognizes my face and takes me straight in. Either or, it's using multiple factors to make my life as a user much more simplistic. And from a risk-based administration point of view, that I can guarantee that that user is that user. And these sort of technologies cannot be used with other things to make it think. So you couldn't hold up a picture in front of the facial recognition software because it just doesn't work. You couldn't hold up a screen in front of it; it just doesn't work. To actually fool these systems, and especially when they're multi-layered, becomes very, very hard to do, and thus protects your business quite well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess lots of exciting things happening in this space, and I believe you also, I saw recently a nice demo on these little FIDO2 sticks that you can use to authenticate as well. So some really good things coming out there, and the sooner, at least for me, that we can get away from these complex passwords, the better. So I think that pretty much covers the security piece, or the most secure piece in the modern desktop world. Do you have any questions, before we cover off the last sort of components of, the most productive piece that we're going to move on to next? So we'll just give a couple of seconds to see if anyone has a question, and we'll move on if not.
Let's have a quick look. No, I don't think so.
Oh, that's cool. That's
No, it's all right. I think someone's maybe raised their hand, but if you do have any questions, there's a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you just pop them into there, type it in, and we can read it out to everybody and answer for you. As we said at the beginning, we want you to get the most out of this session, and we don't do many virtual roundtables where you can sort of ask questions throughout as we go along. So we can kind of chop and change the direction of the session depending on what you guys want to get out of it. So if there are any questions that you would like to ask, please do. But I can't see anything written in the questions box at the moment, so I guess we will move on to the next section. Thanks.
Thanks, Cassie. So, I mean, if you do think of something and it's on one of the other topics, then feel free to just still put those questions in, and we'll have a look at them at the end of the next session as well. Okay, so let's just change the slide. Moving on now to most productive. And I guess there's lots to talk about in this area. So we'll touch on a couple of those components. I don't think we'll have time to cover everyone in a lot of detail, but I'll certainly pick out one or two that I think really helps me on my day-to-day basis, and things that certainly make me more productive as I go through the day and work and collaborate with my colleagues, for example. So intelligent assistant to stay on track. I guess some of the key pieces here is, and something I certainly use a lot, is that focused inbox. So if you're using Exchange Online and the newer versions of Outlook, certainly it came out on iOS, I think, in the first, having a focused inbox with Outlook, but it really leverages some of that capability built into Office 365, so that artificial intelligence and machine learning fabric layer that's built into those services to sort of make sure that your inbox is where you have your most important emails, and then potentially announcements and other less important emails go to your other folder in your inbox. So it can also learn over time. So if something kind of gets stuck in the wrong place, then you right-click, move it to your inbox or focused inbox, or move from focused inbox to other. It'll learn as you go along. So something that's really helped me stay on top of my inbox. I'm not really good at taking emails and foldering them away, so this really keeps me on track, so that I'm focused on the most important emails as we move forward. We have a quick question, actually, and Andy, maybe you can help out with this one as well. Great to see a question, thank you. So the question is, could Windows Defender replace a traditional third-party product? So I guess from an AV perspective, maybe Andy, what can it do? And then we have the threat protection, advanced threat protection components as well. So there's AV, and that's kind of like known virus definition file, what are we doing from that perspective, and then I guess the advanced threat protection. And can that, replace maybe those typical third-party products from a security perspective or AV perspective out there?
Yes, I mean, if you want the direct answer is yes. Microsoft can provide that complete end user desktop security product set. The great thing is that it's built into the operating system now. So rather than having that third party product that needs to interface with the operating system to get information out, we're actually talking something that's part of the raw operating system. So it doesn't have to go out to check that it's doing things correctly or it's working correctly. It just is. So Microsoft does provide now the full capability. It is under the Defender suite, so the entire suite. So it does provide you with that end user control capability for the whole end user desktop environment, from everything from antiviral control right the way through to the entirety of protecting your desktop with the Azure-based, machine learning-based capabilities. Microsoft are aiming to make that as simple as they can for the end user and not in any way complicated. They don't want the user to be aware of what's happening. They want to make sure that this is seamlessly working with inside all of your protection suites that are there. So yeah, the complete answer is yes, Microsoft can provide through the Defender suite that similar experience to the way you get with your current vendors. You could name very quickly all of the big brands that are out there. They have spent their entire periods of time creating these pieces of software that do protect you against malware and antiviral solutions, anti-worm, anything that actually is going to hit you. But from a Microsoft perspective, they've also been working, being the fact that they've been a target of attack since the mid-80s. Microsoft have a significant amount of experience in protecting their assets and their environments, and now they've applied that experience not only at a local level on that individual device, but also with the machine learning capabilities along the top. To give you an example of what they did, Microsoft decided to have a go and see how good their environment actually was. They designed a piece of malware in order to test it, so a non-terribly destructive one, and they inserted it in Canada, in one of their offices in Canada, took it in on a USB stick, plugged it into the side of one of the machines, and let it run. The reporting that came back was that it had got as far as 3 machines before it was completely locked out by Azure Threat Protection. And those 3 machines then were locked down and alerted back. What was the good thing about it is because it actually was picked up and analyzed by the threat protection matrix of products, it was actually distributed as a cure globally. And that all happened within a matter of an hour or so. So it was picked up very, very quickly and distributed, that solution, very quickly amongst their entire estate. So everyone was then protected against that particular piece of malware that came out. So it is available and it is capable of protecting your devices now. There's no reason why you couldn't use a third-party product, but Microsoft, if you're already paying for the Microsoft suite, utilize the tools that are provided for you.
Thanks. Oh, I just dropped off the call. What happened? Oh, am I still there?
You're still here.
Oh, I don't know what happened. I pushed the button on my headset. Sorry. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I guess so. I hope that answers the question. If maybe there's something else, or you wanted a follow-on question, please feel free to still type it in, and we'll get to that as we move through the next couple of slides. So I guess I quickly talked about Focus Inbox. The other piece that for me is really useful, and that kind of leverages Windows 10 as well as I guess the Office suite as well, because if I'm working on content and I'm saving that in things like OneDrive or SharePoint Online, these other few features would light up as well. So having that enterprise search capability when I go into search on Windows 10, that it's not just searching what's locally on my hard drive, but also will go into my OneDrive for Business, OneDrive Personal, so it knows about all my connected cloud accounts as well, and also things like SharePoint Online. So I just have to search in Windows, and it will then sort of look through the entire landscape to find those files that I need to work on. So really, nice feature there to help me and find things a lot quicker than before. And then the other piece is Windows Timeline. So I think that is a fairly newer feature, and that's that little icon next to the big E and the edge on the taskbar there. And if you click on that, if you can see my little arrow there, that kind of gives you a view on all the content that you've been working on throughout the last couple of days, I guess. And if I'm working on something on my Windows 10 PC at the office or laptop, and then I go home and I pull out my Surface, for example, I can go to Windows Timeline and I'll see, I was working on a Windows document, a Word document, a PowerPoint document, and I can just click on that in the Windows Timeline, and it'll sort of let me resume from where I was working off. So I don't have to worry about saving it or emailing it to myself. Windows Timeline really helps me with that piece as well. Do we have another question there? So we have another question. It says, hi, could Windows Defender, we've done that one. Oh, no. Could Windows Defender replace traditional, oh no, sorry. What options does OneDrive for Business have for sharing docs between colleagues, departments? What access control is there, and how easy is the admin around that?
Would you like me to take
get that, Andy? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so it's up to you how you decide you want to provide those collaboration capabilities with inside OneDrive. So OneDrive is, yes, it's a storage location, but it is also a collaboration location for that sort of one-to-one collaboration, which means if you wanted to share a document or a directory with inside your OneDrive with a specific person, you can do, and you can reduce their access to it to effectively read only if you wanted, or provide them with the editing capabilities with inside your that particular document itself. Now that could be set in at a global level. I'm saying global in the terms of your environment. So you could prevent certain user groups from talking to other user groups. That can be set if need be. But yeah, it's generally available to make sure that those capabilities are open or not for communication between OneDrive users. Now, if your question is leading towards basically utilization of OneDrive as a shared drive, that's not really what it's been designed to do, and you would be better off putting the data into SharePoint to have that shared drive capability. OneDrive is pretty much a one-to-one or one-to-a-few environment to enable you to have that collaboration before you put something potentially into a shared environment for the greater masses to be able to collaborate on.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess, some of the ways that, obviously when I use OneDrive for Business and some of the collaboration or productivity tips, if I can just quickly, for me, if I'm working on a document and then I want to share that with somebody, often it might be originating from an email. Somebody, sends me an email and they're like, hey, that doc we were working on the other day, please can you send it to me? So I might reply in there and say, sure. And then, I can go in and say attach documents. I'll browse to that file, and because it's all sort of integrated with Windows 10 with files on demand, even if it hasn't been downloaded to that PC, so I could be on any PC anywhere, and I reply to that email and I browse to that file, it'll then give me a sort of option to whether I want to attach it as an attachment or send it as a link to that person that's requesting the file. So, often I'd just say, yeah, let's send that out, and it might be too big to send as an attachment. So I'll send it out via email. And it looks like an attachment store. So from an end user perspective, there's no real change in the way they would attach a document like a PowerPoint file. But then, as I send it out, it also looks at permissions to see that the person I'm replying to, do they actually have permissions to access that PowerPoint file in my OneDrive? If not, it'll then go in and add permissions as well. So I don't have to know how do I, make sure that I'm sharing a file, and does that user have access to the file when I send it off? Is it too big? I just go and attach, and I do a cloud attachment instead of a normal attachment. Off it goes, and that user can then log in, open the file, we can collaborate in real time together. There's version control turned on and all those good things as well. So lots of good stuff there. So another great feature, I think, in Windows 10, that it's fairly newer feature, and I think there's going to be lots of advancement and new stuff happening in this space as well, is the ability for me to kind of connect my mobile device, whether it be an iOS device or an Android device, with my Windows 10 PC. So so then I can have a look at what sort of text messages are coming in, respond to those text messages all from my Windows PC, instead of having to pull that mobile phone out my pockets, have a look at the text message, reply. It'll pop up as a notification on Windows 10. I can reply in line, then send it out, and it'll actually use my phone to do that. So another really good example where Microsoft are sort of working nicely with Android and iOS to make your life a lot easier and more productive. And also things like photographs. So, the last couple of photographs that you take will also sync through this way as well. And it all kind of happens over the Wi-Fi. There's no real difficulty in terms of setting it up. Once you set that up and you have the apps installed, it kind of just connects seamlessly, and you'll see those things coming through. And I think there'll be some cool stuff happening in this space as well. Also things like if I'm browsing something on my phone and I want to then continue on my Windows PC, I can do that as well. from an office perspective, I guess lots of new innovation happening in the space. And, I guess if you're in that old world and the old versions of Office, the things that you get and enhancements that you get when you move to 365 Pro Plus really is around, when you have a set of data, I guess, leveraging in the background that artificial intelligence to help you kind of make more sense of the data, I guess. So leveraging those services in the background. There's a new thing, and I guess it's a theme that's kind of coming across the productivity suite. It's called ideas or insights. So I could have a set of data in Excel, for example, and I just right click on it, or I say, show me some ideas, and then it'll kind of look at the data and give me sort of show me some correlations between the data, give me some nice graphs. So it really then leverages that power in the back end to be able to do that for me, and then give me something that I could potentially make more sense out of. And that's kind of evolving as time goes on. But I guess where it's sort of more prevalent is in PowerPoint, and it's probably one of the most the best feature for me, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, because I do quite a few presentations, and I'm not, I guess, the most creative person when it comes to putting together these presentations. So, I might start off with a few bullet points, throw in a picture, and think that's good enough to, show a lot of people. But fortunately, with things like PowerPoint design ideas, I could do that. So have a few bullet points, throw in a picture, design ideas will automatically pop up within PowerPoint, and then give me some recommendations. So down the side, I can then select which one I think looks more attractive and it's going to work better for my style. It also does things like if I put in potentially an agenda with timeline items, it'll then throw it up in a timeline view for you. So it really is trying to make your life a lot easier when with that creativity process within Office. I don't know if, Andy, you've had any sort of, you've got any tips and tricks as you work on your day-to-day basis with these kinds of new features that are built into Office 365 Pro Plus?
To be perfectly honest, as I'm a techie and not arty in any way, shape, or form, having the design ideas in the PowerPoint has just been a lifesaver.
Yeah.
And that's the one I would say I use most often. But I'm glad you put that one up. The ink capabilities.
Yeah.
I use a Surface Book, so I have the ability to utilize the pens on screen. So writing stuff on screen quite a bit, and it even manages to analyze my handwriting. Now,
wow, that is impressive.
My handwriting is truly appalling. I'm worse than a doctor. And yet it has managed to learn how I write properly and be able to convert that text straight back into it, which makes things very, very simple. And the combination of the two tools, so with the design ideas that I get out of PowerPoint, my ability to just draw stuff on a PowerPoint slide and it just makes it happen, makes my life a lot simpler. I do also utilize the dictation capabilities now built into the Office apps, so I can just literally write an email by talking to it. Now, previously, I've had to use other third-party vendor tools like, for instance, Dragon Dictate and others to utilize those dictation capabilities. And I have a very good friend of mine that's extremely dyslexic and is now using all of the dictation tools he can possibly get his scruffy mitts on within inside the Office, so it will actually talk to him and read the document back to him, and he can correct it. The great thing is, it's a bit like Mickey Mouse. It does follow you along the document as it's speaking it out to you, which has enabled him to write some fairly complex quotes because he's a builder. Great with his hands, just no good at the IT side of things. So this has actually been a massive breakthrough for him, and his wife thanks the day that it was ever invented, because it saves her having to type up all his quotes for him.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and I guess, that's one of the key things here as well, is that, it's not just, the ability to then interact with content with, typical mouse and keyboard, is that you have the options to use ink, digital ink, voice, and other capabilities as well. As we've seen more and more these days. There's a great new whiteboarding app that's available for Windows 10 as well, which I've ended up using in a few examples as well, where you want to have a whiteboarding session with somebody. You can open up that whiteboard app, and it's been sort of taken from the Surface Hub and where that originated. Everybody loved it so much, and they were like, well, why can't we have this in Windows 10? As it's built on the same sort of foundation as Windows 10. They then made it available to everybody through the Windows Store. So if you're on Windows 10, check out the whiteboard app. You can then have an interactive whiteboarding session with people across the world, and share the content, see it in real time. So if you're drawing and somebody else is drawing at the same time, it all kind of comes together. So really nice new ways to interact with content through Windows 10 and Office 365 Pro Plus. I guess a lot of this we've spoken to, while answering the questions around OneDrive. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but certainly, the ability to co-author, have version control is something that really changes the way you work. But also it's a great feature in terms of, security as well. So if you're saving all your content in OneDrive for business, for example, and you do get hit with ransomware, OneDrive has this pretty great feature that I can go into and say, I want to roll back all my content to maybe a day ago, maybe a week ago, and I can just move that slider across, and it'll then sort of revert all my files back to one version before it got hit with that ransomware attack, for example. So, there are some real capabilities other than just the ability to collaborate in real time and those sort of things, but from a security and perspective, there's some cool things they do in there as well. So I think that kind of covers off all the pieces that we wanted to speak about today. If there's any questions around the productivity stuff, please do ask now as well. I think, if you want to. Thanks, Cassie. Yeah, so we'll wait online for a little bit. I think there was another question early on, wasn't really relating to some of the pieces that we were covering at the time. Maybe we can just have a look at that one again. Oh yes, this was at the start of the presentation. There was a mention of commercial changes for 365 in 2010. In 2020, can you guys elaborate on that? So this was that first slide, I guess, where we showed those three pieces, Windows 7 end of support, when that was. So was January 2020, Office 2010 end of support in October 2020, if I'm correct from memory. I think that was October. And then also the commercial services. Let me just find that slide again quickly, just to remind everybody. So I believe it was probably this slide here, 2020 for October. So the changes to the commercial services would be around, I think mostly and largely around the support compatibility with the service in Office 365. So although technically it may work when you use Office 2010 with Office 365 post that October 2020 date, they'll have to update their, I guess, online terms and commercial service offerings and the pieces around that say, once it moves out of extended support, they can't guarantee the service that they're going to give you with Office 2010 and Office 365. So if you're using it with any of the services in Office 365, they can't basically guarantee that the service you're going to get or the features that you're going to get are going to be compatible. So we'll try and find a little bit more detail around that piece specifically, because I guess it could be interpreted in a few different ways. So we'll certainly, unless Andy, you have any more context around that piece.
Not a great deal, no.
No. Okay, cool. So we'll see if we can just find a little bit more detail around that as well, if we weren't too clear on how that's been explained. So we'll certainly follow up on that one.
There are some Microsoft effectively PDFs or announcements about it, which go into more detail about what, why, and how how you can purchase extended support, or if you can utilize it, or along those sort of lines. It is available.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So we will certainly get those out. But I think that pretty much wraps up the session. And I guess as one of the call to actions, if you're like to have a deeper engagement with myself and Andy, please reach out to your account managers. I think we have a slide right at the end that gives address as well. If you want to know more, you can also then email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. So we'd certainly love to come and engage further around some of these topics. So please do reach out to your account team at Bytes, and we can schedule up those sessions to go a little bit deeper into any of these topics that we spoke about today. It'd be really great to engage a bit further on these things if you need to.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Andy. So yeah, if there aren't any other questions, then I guess we'll wrap this one up. I know everybody's probably got a busy day ahead of them. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I do know that everybody's time is very valuable, so really do appreciate it. There is a quick feedback form that will just pop up at the end of the webinar. If you could just fill that out, it's just a couple of questions that really does help us. So thank you, everybody, and hope you all have a great day.